Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I love sweatpants. I mean, really. Get a nice pair of sweatpants and there's really nothing better. It's like lounging around with a fluffy, warm cloud covering your lower half. And I know for a fact that since this pandemic started, I'm not the only one who's developed a deep appreciation for these cotton comfort treasures. I have friends who are lawyers, doctors, teachers, stock traders, marketers, who have reveled in the fact that in a Zoom world, you can be business on top and day spa from the waist down. So I want to take 1 second for us to appreciate that, because being physically comfortable and cozy is something we shouldn't take for granted. We should appreciate it. We should give thanks for it and take advantage of the opportunity that we have when appropriate. But, of course, because this is a Dvar Torah, there's a but. I want to challenge us this morning to rethink the idea of perpetual coziness and to use this week's parasha as a model for how we can come together as a synagogue family on Shabbat in a way that feels intentional, mindful, and meaningful. Because ultimately, that is the point of what we're doing here. When we get on Zoom and pray together on Shabbat, we're not just hanging out, although I do want to acknowledge that hanging out is and should be a part of it. We are creating community, fostering and cultivating family, lifting up our voices in gratitude and hope. And therefore, with this beautiful combination, we're building holiness. And I want us to take that seriously because I think that's important. We are really building holiness. And holiness, as we just laid out, should be different than everything else. It should look different. It should feel different. The holy, the sacred shouldn't be like work or like classes or like spending time with our friends. It should be powerful, loving, comforting, distinct. I'll say that last part again. It should be distinct. That word is crucial, especially in Judaism. The idea of holiness is distinct. So let's look at how we can demarcate it as such, because we have an incredible paradigm in this week's parasha that I want us to kind of look through and dissect together. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen for a second, and we're going to look at a few different texts, and I think it's going to help us point us in a different direction, one that we can use for Shabbat and any time when we need to make a moment of holiness. So if we'll look all the way back here, in Genesis chapter 24, verses 63 through 65, I'm trying not to do any spoilers on the sheet here, but we have a really interesting Hebrew word that's going to set us up for everything that we're about to discuss. We read in the Hebrew, Vayetzi Yitzchak lasuach basadeh, lifnot erev vayisa einav vayar vehine gmalim ba'im, Isaac lasuach. We're going to go talk about what this word is. But for the Hebrew speakers out there, hold on to that word. Isaac does this verb called lasuach, which in the English translation here in Sefaria says, Isaac went out walking in the field toward evening. And looking up, he saw camels approaching. Raising her eyes, Rivka saw Yitzchak. She alighted from the camel and said to the servant, who is this man walking in the field towards us? And the servant said, that is my master. So she took her veil and covered herself. This moment of profound love and gratitude, this is actually the source of a bedekin in a Jewish wedding, where there's this idea of profound love and affection that we cover ourselves in kind of this idea of transcendence in our love. But here's this word that's a really interesting word. Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach. Isaac goes out into the field and does this verb, lasuach. And the translation is went out walking. But all of the commentators, including the Talmud itself, says that's not a word that we ever see that means to walk or to go. So to the Hebrew speakers out there, you'll know that there's a common word to use, which is lalechet, quite literally to go. It's the same root for halacha. There's also another verb that we can use, letayel, which is to go out and like journey around. If you've ever been to Jerusalem, there's a certain stretch that you can go on the outskirts of Jerusalem, which is called the tayelet. It's really kind of the walking path where you can kind of look at the old city. But neither of those verbs are the verbs that are used here. There is a verb called lasuach. So Rashi tells us that this verb actually means to meditate. And if we go a little bit further on, it means to pray. L'suach l'shon tefillah, that the word l'suach is actually the language of prayer. And then he uses a proof text from Psalms 102, a prayer for the afflicted, when he pours out his lamentation, which you can see here is sicho, which comes from the exact same word. And our rabbis in the Talmud in Masechet Brachot go even a step further to say not only was Isaac out meditating or praying, he actually institutes the prayer that we know as mincha, the afternoon prayer. And they derive it from this pasuk. They derive it from this verse, that Isaac instituted the afternoon prayer, as it is stated, and Isaac went out to converse, lasuach, in the field toward evening. And conversation means nothing other than prayer. As it is stated, a prayer of the afflicted when he is faint and pours out his lamentation, sicho, the same root, before the Lord. Obviously, Isaac was the first to pray as evening approached, as the time of the afternoon prayer. So what our commentators are saying here in a really beautiful way is that this verb takes on a very different dimension for a specific purpose. That when Rebekah sees Isaac in the field, he's not strolling in the field, walking in a normal way that someone would walk. He's changing his intention. He's changing his mindfulness. He's changing the way that he approaches the world. And he is turning his field into a synagogue. He's turning the space around him into a space of prayer. And a later commentator says that we have not found any place where the word lissuach, this verb that we looked at, means tiul, to travel about. So therefore, there's certainly no meaning here, as many explain letayel in the field. The rabbi's explanation that this is prayer, that this is meaningful prayer, turning a field into a synagogue, is the only true literal one. So what does that have to do with us? We see in our parasha this beautiful idea of Isaac going out into the field and making his prayer space one that we wouldn't normally think of as a common prayer space. We would think of it as some place of agriculture, a place of work, and Isaac turns it into something more. So bear with me. This is going to be a little long as I read Abraham Joshua Heschel here, but this is going to give us a little bit of an idea of why this is meaningful to us. So Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote in his book, The Sabbath, Judaism is a religion of time, aiming at the sanctification of time. Unlike the space-minded man, to whom time is unvaried, iterative, homogeneous, to whom all hours are alike, qualityless, empty shells, the Bible senses the diversified character of time. There are no 2 hours alike. Every hour is unique, and the only one given at the moment exclusive and endlessly precious. Judaism teaches us to be attached to holiness in time, to be attached to sacred events, to learn how to consecrate sanctuaries that emerge from the magnificent stream of a year. Shabbatot, the Sabbaths, are our great cathedrals, and our Holy of Holies is a shrine that neither the Romans nor the Germans were able to burn, a shrine that even apostasy cannot easily obliterate. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. According to the ancient rabbis, it is not the observance of the Day of Atonement of Yom Kippur, but the day itself, the essence of the day, which, with man's repentance, atones for the sins of man. So Jewish ritual may be characterized as the art of significant forms in time. And this is going to be appropriate for us as we talk about Shabbat, but also as we honor Rosh Chodesh this week. So as architecture of time, most of its observance, the Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, the festivals, the sabbatical, and the Jubilee year depends on a certain hour of the day or season of the year. It is, for example, the evening, morning, or afternoon that brings with it the call to prayer. The main themes of faith lie in the realm of time. We remember the day of the Exodus from Egypt, the day when Israel stood at Sinai, and our messianic hope is the expectation of a day, of the end of days. Now, Heschel goes on to talk about what is this idea of Kedusha, of holiness, as it exists in the Jewish framework and in Jewish text. And he says that the very first idea of anything becoming holy in Jewish tradition was the creation of the first day and creation of Shabbat at the end of that work of creation, that God created Shabbat and called it holy. So Heschel is telling us that holiness exists in this realm of time, not necessarily in a realm of space. And I am, as a good Jewish thinker should do, will say, yes, absolutely, Heschel, beautiful. Judaism exists in holiness and time. I love it. And I think it's okay to say that in Judaism, we also need holiness and space. So we're going to look at one more text here, coming from Achera Eliade, who was a sociologist and space thinker. And he wrote in his book, The Sacred and the Profane and the Nature of Religion. We'll have to bear with me as we go through a little bit of King James translation here. But for religious man, space is not homogeneous. So Heschel above just said that space is homogeneous. Eliade is going to argue with him and say, for religious man, space is not homogeneous. He experiences interruptions, breaks in it. Some parts of space are qualitatively different from other parts of space. So here's a good King James translation. Draw not nigh hither, says the Lord to Moses. Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. So in common English, take off your shoes as you approach this place, because where you are standing right now is holy. It's sacred. It is different from the other physical space around you. And we're reminded that here in Shemot chapter 3, verse 5 is when Moses is approaching God at the burning bush. There is then a sacred space, and hence a strong, significant space. There are other spaces that are not sacred, and so are without structure or consistency, amorphous. Nor is this all. For religious man, this spatial non-homogeneity finds expression in the experience of an opposition between space that is sacred, the only real and really existing space, and all other space, the formless expanse around it. And if we take one more little verse here coming from Exodus 25, we're reminded of this idea of space being significant in Judaism as well. From Shemot chapter 25, and let them make me a sanctuary. Ve'asuli mikdash ve'shachanti betocham. This idea of building the Mishkan, of building a sacred place to God, is really creation of physical sacred space, not just so God can dwell there, but so that God can dwell within us. And here comes our challenge, because when we're looking at these different ideas of sacredness existing in time and holiness existing both in time and space, we have to face a reality of our moment right now that for the foreseeable future, even with an incredible building readiness task force and the implementation of slowly returning to our sacred space of our congregation and our beautiful building on Bell Road, that Shabbat for a while, for many of us, for most of us, it's going to be in our homes. It's going to be in our homes, or it's going to be visiting family. And we have to find a way to turn our space into space that's sacred. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that our goal here is to turn wherever we are when we pray together on a Shabbat morning into our own Beit Knesset, into our own synagogue. And that has to look different and has to feel different. And it's a challenge, and I don't want to take anything away from what Rabbi Starr is going to be talking about, the Rabbi's Tish after services, but this is an important thing to talk about too as we move forward with the future of conservative Judaism. How do we create physical space, sacred physical space in our homes, in our houses, in places that aren't the places we relied on before? We've relied heavily on our synagogue, and we love our synagogue building. It's the reason that we have our backdrop as what it is. It is a piece of architecture. It is a piece of goodness. It is a piece of holiness that we use to help cultivate our prayer. So when we can't be there, we have to find a way to be in an alternative. We can't always be in our sweatpants. I would love to always be in our sweatpants, but there is a time where we have to set our intention to demarcate the space that we have and the time that we have. We have this opportunity before us to build a Mishkan. And it looks a little bit different than we might think of. It's not necessarily the sanctuary space that we go to every Shabbat morning. It's in our living rooms, or our studies, or our bedrooms, wherever it might be. But we need to work on building this together. So I'm going to run through a quick little checklist, and I'm going to put this out in the email that will come out on Monday or Tuesday, but I'll also put it on social media and our Facebook page and our Torah Maps page, especially after Shabbat is over, which is just an idea for us to be able to share these different thoughts about how we can start building our Bate Knesset, building our sacred space in our homes. So here's the idea. Let's make a game plan. This isn't just for high holidays. It's for Shabbat. It's for every time that we need to mark holiness. So in a journal, after Shabbat, of course, or anywhere that you can put down some meaningful notes and plans of action, start brainstorming what your prayer space can look like. Be sure to comment on the following and feel free to add more to this checklist. Again, I'm going to make this available to everyone. So the question number one, where will I pray? Are there numerous different spaces meant for different times? Is there a space for online services and another space for kind of tech-free meditation? Do you have a place where you're going to sign on to synagogue in your study, and then you can have moments for private prayer in your bedroom, basement, wherever it might be? Number two, what will I add to make my space reflect my spiritual needs? Be intentional in the space that you create. Do you need flowers around you, books around you? Should the space be clutter-free or intentionally a little chaotic? Number three, how will my space sound? Do I want absolute quiet, or might I want the sound of birds, cars going by, whatever it might be? Four, how will my prayer space smell? Does my prayer space need anything to help with this? Do I want fresh air, scented air, whatever it might be? And five, here I am wearing our props for the week. I don't like wearing a tie, I must admit, but here I am in a tie and jacket to say, how will I dress? What will I wear to make the space and the time feel different? Do I feel like I should wear what I normally would to shul? Should I wear a suit and tie, or does the change of prayer space lend itself to a different type of intentional attire? Again, I'm not here to give the answers. I'm here to prompt the question, whatever feels meaningful for you. And our kibbutz back in Israel, everyone wore white on Friday and into Saturday. It was a very intentional, different idea of changing your physical appearance for 25 hours of Shabbat. Some folks, and there are a lot of folks on the Zoom calls on Shabbat morning, wear exactly what they would wear to synagogue. And that is a good change of pace from the rest of the week to go from sweatpants to something a little bit more formal, something that actually demarcates the day into these 25 hours of holiness. And Susan, you'll have to remind me of what the word they used in the Wall Street Journal this week was, but they came out with an article in the Wall Street Journal, which actually named this idea of setting your intention and dressing differently in this Zoom environment and the Zoom world that we live in, because it actually puts us in a different mindset when we do so. And number six, what other spaces need their own intentionality? In Judaism, we learned that the dining room table becomes the new altar, becomes the replacement for the second temple. Does my meal space look the way that I want it to? Do any other rooms in my house need some thought if I'm going to put some intention into my Shabbat? So this is just a quick way for us to kind of look at what the next few weeks, months are going to look like. And I know that it's not the cheeriest thing that we should be hearing, and I know that we should always be putting forth this idea of hope and optimism, but I want us to be mindful and I want us to be intentional, because the days are getting shorter. Oh, thank you, Susan. Enclothed cognition is what the Wall Street Journal calls this. Enclothed cognition of changing your wardrobe to be able to help change your mental state as well. But as we all live in Michigan, we know, not all of us, sorry, Nelson. As we all live in Michigan, we know that the winters can be cold and it can be dreary, and we might not see the sun for a while. And as the days get short, and without a lot of that sunshine, we're going to need to be able to change the way that we think about different days of the week, but especially Shabbat. And especially when we need this whole idea of Shabbat is to be able to give us a bolt of energy, a rejuvenation, not just of our physical embracement of this, but also of our spirit and of our mental state. And being able to come together and share these different ways is going to be a really good way for us to do this. So again, a reminder that I hope that this can be part of our conversation as well as we're moving forward. So Kedusha, holiness, is about creating something not just emotionally or mentally significant, but it's also about marking that significance in a way that we can physically feel or take stock of. Okay, so let's work on ways to build it for ourselves and for our synagogue family. Let's check in, let's share in our Facebook group, and when we meet on Zoom, the ways we're building holiness, so we can help each other out. Let's share the different ideas that are working for us. Let's make some plans. Let's do some good spiritual housekeeping, and let's build our sanctuaries wherever we need them to be. So with that, we'll say Shabbat Shalom.